and speak also from my own personal experience, you just kind of think like, oh, writing a book is going to be such a huge accomplishment and it's going to feel like a bucket list item and my life is going to change once my book comes out. And that's just unrealistic. That's not how it tends to go. We just think, I'll write the book and everything will magically be great. And so when it's not magically great, that can have people feeling like, oh, something went wrong, or I did something wrong, or it was the wrong publisher. And it really was just that they didn't really know what to expect.
Welcome to the Publishing Playbook, the podcast that goes behind the scenes of the book publishing world. Our goal is to help you understand publishing better, collaborate with the team behind your book, and find your readers. I'm your host, Sarah Russo, the founder and CEO of Page One Media and Page One Education. My guest today is Laura Portwood-Stacer, the founder of Manuscript Works. Laura helps scholars navigate the publishing process, and she's the author of two indispensable guides for academic writers, the Book Proposal Book and Make Your Manuscript Work. In this episode, we talk about the key elements every book proposal needs and why authors' expectations about getting a book published don't always align with reality. Laura also shares her advice for authors about agents, AI, and the one thing you can do right now if you want to publish a manuscript but have no idea where to start. Laura Portwood-Stacer, thank you so much for coming on the Publishing Playbook.
Thanks so much for having me. It's fun to be here.
Yeah. You have spent years in academia before founding Manuscript Works in 2015. Why did you make that change? What was it? What was the impetus that drove you from actively working in academia to helping scholars navigate publishing?
Well, at the time, I didn't really feel like I had the choice. The job market made that decision for me. I now think I really ended up where I was supposed to be because I did have a little bit of experience as an academic doing sort of volunteer editorial work. And it turned out that was the part of being an academic I liked the most and where I felt like I was being the most helpful and where writers were saying, oh, I've never received this much feedback on my work, or I've never received this depth of attention to something I've written. So I thought, well, maybe people will pay me to give them that kind of support if they're not getting it from peers and mentors. And the rest is kind of history. It's worked out pretty well in the last 11 years.
It really has. And I mean, you are a tremendous resource for writers working in the academic space. I refer your website to writers working in all different spaces because the advice is applicable to so many. The old adage, right, publish or perish, is one of those things that I feel like it just puts so much pressure on academics. Do you feel like that still applies today? Is that sort of no longer necessary? Getting jobs and getting tenure in academia is so challenging. Do you have to publish in order to continue to climb?
I mean, it's still true that you need publications and you need academic publications. Right. And in some fields, you need a book to get tenure. But I would say it's no longer such a straight line in that you can write a book, you can do everything right and still not get the job, still not get the promotion, still not get tenure. Your institution might close or shutter your department. I'm always trying to get people to see it not just as a box they have to check for a career requirement, but as something they genuinely want to do, so that if it doesn't pay off in one way, it'll pay off in other ways, or they can find other ways to leverage the book for whatever comes next, even if it's not an academic promotion or career.
You've published two more books since that first one. Both of those are phenomenal guides written specifically for scholars who are hoping to publish. The Book Proposal Book was the first one, came out a few years ago. Make Your Manuscript Work is the new one and came out more recently. It's funny to me that there are so few books out there to help authors with the process. Why do you think there's so little high quality guidance?
Yeah, I've never been asked that question before. And it's funny because when I was first thinking about writing the Book Proposal Book, I spoke with an editor who actually had approached me. And I said, well, do we really need another book about how to publish books?
There
and he was like,
really
yes, we do.
Yeah, there's
and
like a tiny
the appetite
handful
for them exceeds what is available. I think one of the things that I think is like My superpower as an advisor and editor is that I can see where things have been assumed to be obvious but aren't, making sort of spoken the unspoken rules of academia and of
Yeah.
publishing. But it was funny, one of the comments I got on a peer review for my book proposal for the book proposal book was, do we really need a whole book about this? Like, couldn't this just be a pamphlet or something? And I'm like, no, we actually do need a whole
No,
book.
actually, yeah.
And, the readership has spoken and said, yeah, we need that.
I would say one of the biggest problems I encountered routinely at Oxford was authors who were going from doing a purely academic monograph to doing an academic trade crossover book really struggled with the timeline and the deadlines. Because if you don't hand in your manuscript or you don't turn around the copy edits according to the timeline that you've been assigned by production, that really messes up with the whole trade production process. We're pitching to sales, we're getting it into the catalog, right? All of those things are happening. If you don't turn around the copy edits, all of a sudden you're no longer in the spring season. Now you're in the fall season, and all of the selling in that sales did gets completely wiped out. So there was always an education process in trying to get authors to understand sticking to the schedule is absolutely vital. Are there specific things that you wish scholars and academics knew before they started their book publishing journey?
My job is to tell them the things they don't know. So it's
Yes.
fine if they
Yeah.
don't know anything. I think most writers are struggling just because it's a hard thing to do,
Yeah.
to put your thoughts into book form and then to go through all the other steps of the process besides the writing of the book. So I think just sort of being prepared for that and not taking it as a personal failing when you run up against obstacles.
Would you walk us through a few of the key elements in a strong book proposal for an academic?
Different publishers have different submission guidelines and different requirements, but they're almost all looking for essentially the same things: a working title that says what the book is about, a succinct project overview that sort of
Okay.
conveys, again, what the book's about, why it needs to be a book. They usually want an annotated table of contents, which means sort of summaries of each substantive chapter. And then they're looking for also sort of more meta information about how to publish this book well. So, what are the other books recently published that this book is going to be in conversation with? And that's really a way of getting at what is the readership for this book, and what are readers looking for in a book like this. And then there'll be some specific discussion or a more explicit discussion of the actual readership, like who are you writing this book for. And the publisher needs to know that in order to see, do they publish books for that readership? Do they know how to get a book out to that market? And then they're usually looking for some other sort of meta information, like how long is the book going to be? What kind of illustrations will there be, if any? What's your timeline for completion of the manuscript? And then some information about you as the author. And what they're looking for there is, are you an expert on this topic? Do people
Yeah.
recognize you as an expert on this topic? When this book is published, where will people recognize your name and be, ready and waiting for a book that you've written? And then they often want to see a writing sample from the manuscript itself, especially for a first-time author,
Sure.
just to get a sense of what this book is going to read like on the page.
Writers need to understand that there's a readership, right? So there's an audience that we're writing to with the proposal, and that's the ed board audience. That may be the editor that you're submitting to, but it may also be the publisher. It may be salespeople. It may be the person who sits in finance, right, and approves the advances and budgets. So it's a different audience than the audience they're going to be writing the book for later on down the line. What parts of the book publishing process are scholars most naive about? Is it the schedule? Is it the writing of the proposal? Is there something that you feel like they really do, in fact, struggle with?
Writing the book is a struggle, just because it takes a lot of time, and everyone is pressed for time. And people haven't necessarily been taught how to write a book. They may have been taught how to write a dissertation, but often we just write a dissertation and hope
Yeah.
it works out. We're not really like taught how to do it. And so then the same goes for the book. And with the book, you have even often even less of a support system. As far as other things authors are naive about, I mean, yeah, I think they just don't, they're not aware of what is happening on the publisher side. And to some extent, they don't need to be aware, but I do think it's helpful to kind of know what the expectations and needs are for a publisher if you're an author, because that way you can meet them or try to meet
Yes.
them. And that just gives you a better chance of having your work received well.
It really is a team effort with the in-house
Yes.
folks and the author and anyone else that the author brings in to help them. It's a monumental feat publishing the book, so to help them accomplish the task.
I don't know if it's part of just like the nature of academia, but I think authors come into it thinking it's an adversarial relationship or it's a gatekeeping relationship, which it can
Yeah,
be,
it
but
can.
they come in maybe not realizing how much on the same team they really are with
Yes.
their editor, especially, and then with their publisher.
They all have the same goal, right? At the end of the day, everyone wants to sell books, but the resource component of things can be a struggle. You have, I think it's a blog post or one of your newsletters that is about how much an in-house editor will developmentally edit the manuscript. And that I found routinely was a problem for authors at Oxford because the expectation was that they were going to get some degree of edits. And more often than not, it just got handed into production. And that was the beginning of the production process. And sure, they got copy edits and things like that, but there was no developmental edit. And I think a lot of authors were like, oh, wait, if there aren't going to be edits, I want to do a little bit more work on this. But that once it's handed in, it's in. So
And you could see publishers being understandably frustrated, like, well, we've approved this, it's good, please
yes,
just send
yeah,
it to us. But because the author didn't know what to expect in the process, they weren't prepared. And that's where Making Your Manuscript Work, my newest book, is supposed to fill that gap, is to help people do their own developmental editing or seek outside help when they're not getting it from the publisher.
in your new book, you discuss the four pillars of scholarly writing: argument, evidence, structure, and style. Can you explain which of these pillars tends to be the most challenging?
I would say they're all challenging and they're all important. But argument, like figuring out what your book's argument is and putting in the argument into a form that will land with readers, will feel compelling as a reason to read an entire academic book, that's really challenging for
Yes.
authors. And then I would say once the book is written, it's often the structural issues that cause people to realize there's a problem or realizing they need to develop the manuscript in a different way. Sometimes peer reviewers will be reacting to the structure of the book. They'll think they're reacting to the substance, but they're really reacting to the structure of it. So that's another big area of challenge, I would say.
Once an author lands the contract, what happens next? Can you talk a little bit about what the typical timeline and expectations are?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can land a contract at a couple different points, and this is maybe a little different than straight up trade publishing. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's common for trade nonfiction for the book to be contracted before the manuscript is fully written. In academic publishing, that can sometimes happen. It also often happens that the full manuscript has been written before the author takes it to a publisher. But either way, the contract does not become sort of, fully executed until the full manuscript has been peer reviewed and approved. There is often a little moment right after the book has been accepted for publication where the writer does often now have one last chance to edit the manuscript or to make any
Okay.
final revisions, maybe some things that the peer reviewer suggested but didn't require. So it's sort of like left in the hands of the writer and the acquiring editor. And then it gets transmitted to production. It's out of the author's hands at that point, pretty much. They are
Right.
not really supposed to make any more changes.
Yes.
It will go to a copy editor. The author will get to review the copy edits and they can, reject changes
Mm-hmm.
suggested by the copy editor in many cases. And then after the copy edits are all settled, the book will be typeset and sort of the interior designed. Mostly We're just making sure everything looks right, so it can then go and be printed.
And I've heard a lot of authors complaining in recent years about having to do the index themselves.
I can't speak for what happened prior to 2013. That's when I published my first book. But I mean, there was no question that the index was my responsibility at that stage. Yeah, I think it is very rare for an author not to be responsible for the index.
Do you find that academics' expectations of the book publishing process align with the reality?
Well, again, I think it might be selection bias, but I tend to hear the negatives more
Yes.
than
Yeah.
the positives. I do think a lot of it comes down to the relationship with the acquiring editor. People who had a good experience often really liked their editor and felt like their editor was very communicative and supportive and sort of helped them through the process. And people who had a negative experience often feel a little like they were on their own. And I, speak also from my own personal experience. You just kind of think like, oh, writing a book is going to be such a huge accomplishment and it's going to
Yeah.
feel like a bucket list item, and my life is going to change once my book comes out. And that's just unrealistic. That's not how it
Yeah.
tends to go. And so that is just kind of a formula for disappointment sometimes, because we don't have a very
Yes.
specific goals or things we want to get out of the process. We just think, I'll write the book and everything will magically be great. And so when it's not magically great, that can have people feeling like, oh, something went wrong, or I did something wrong, or it was the wrong publisher. And it really was just that they didn't really know what to expect.
From my experience, publishers think about the different types of academic books in essentially three buckets, right? Like there are academic books that widely fit a traditional sort of intelligent, intellectual, general reader audience. And then there's those books that are middle of the road, right? There's that little bit of crossover, which in-house we call academic trade. And then there's what we think of as the monographs, right? That sit pretty squarely in either a professional or an academic space. And it's a limited readership, right? It's being brought into academic libraries. And then there's maybe a few hundred readers out there who will purchase a copy because they have to have it on their shelf for reference or whatever it may be. Do you feel like more authors think they lean towards that trade side than the reality actually fits?
That might be true. I think, when you've chosen to study a topic for years of your life, it's hard to see outside of the fact that you find it very compelling and interesting, right? So you
Yes.
would read 20 books on the topic, or maybe hundreds of books.
Yes.
And so there is a little bit of like, well, of course, people, the intelligent lay reader will want to read my book because it's going to be so interesting. But most of the world is not that person. So, yeah, I do try to help people sort of temper expectations and set realistic ones and think about what is it you really want to get out of writing this book.
We worked on a book that I would say, I don't want to say it was precisely a monograph. It was a book called Trans Technologies by Oliver Hameson. And it's about a very specific research area that Oliver works in. But we were in a moment where there was a lot to say in the transgender issue spaces. And Oliver was in a great position to discuss those issues. So we had a lot of press for both the book and for Oliver throughout that campaign, despite the fact that it was very much in the monograph list for MIT Press. And that very likely made sense from that internal perspective. But we could see the ways in which we could reach a larger audience with some really vital information that Oliver had to provide. It also matters what's happening in the media cycle at that moment. Just because your book is not designed for a general audience doesn't mean what you have to say can't be positioned for a general audience, depending on what's happening in the world at that moment. For an academic who's sitting on a manuscript or a really strong dissertation right now and feeling overwhelmed by the process and where to start, can you give that person one step that they could take today to help them?
The one thing I would tell people to do is find a book or two or three that could be a role model for you, that
Yeah.
have done what you want your book to do, whether it's in terms of how it's written or who it has reached or the impact it's had. And part of that is just about like validating that it can be done with a book.
Yeah.
prove it, get some social
Yes.
proof, and then that social proof is going to be useful for your publisher when you're making your pitch to show like this is the kind of thing I'm trying to do.
Can I ask you a secondary question based on that? I know a lot of authors get tripped up by thinking that they absolutely have to have an agent. And I think agents are a wonderful thing to have if you can get one, but they can be sometimes be harder to get than finding a publisher for your book. Do you advise authors on that component of things, or how they might make some first steps into finding an agent who could be a good match?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of writers I work with are not getting agents because they don't need to. You don't need an agent to bring your book proposal to a university press or a commercial academic publisher. I would only be telling people to sort of invest the time in trying to find an agent if they really had trade aspirations, or they were like open to a university press or a trade press and maybe wanted to see what kind of offers they could get.
What are you hearing about AI impacting academic publishing, and do you anticipate any negative effects on the academic press world?
Yeah, I would say I really dislike this topic
Yeah,
because I
I
feel
know.
like resentful that we all have to talk about it
We
when
all are
I never
talking
signed
about it
up to be an expert in
constantly.
AI.
I know. Yeah, it's a mess.
I think it's still an open question with university presses how they are going to be using AI and treating it and have policies about it. I think the overwhelming attitude of editors, of acquiring editors, of the people that writers are going to be interfacing with is pretty negative toward generative AI. I'm
Yeah.
not talking about assistive AI or something that might help you with your grammar or
Yeah.
formatting your bibliography, but using a tool that will write text for you. I think that is not at all embraced at this
Yeah.
point in book publishing. And so I caution authors that I think the risk is too great. I've talked to editors who have said they're running into now peer reviewers are raising suspicions that something was written with AI. And now the editor's in an uncomfortable place of having to go ask the author. And what happens if the author denies that they used AI and we can't prove it? And I just really dislike that it's made us all into sort of paranoid readers of book manuscripts and proposals, and that we can't just evaluate things for the ideas that are in them. And I think most academic writers got into writing because they do love ideas and thinking and research. And so my thing is like, if we're using a non-human agent to do that, then what are we even doing here?
And, almost all of the authors we work with are academics or experts in one area or another. And what I routinely tell them is, you're doing original research and AI doesn't have that research yet, right? So, like, don't put it in there. Don't have it analyze your research for you. I realize that can save people lots of time, but it also means it's now part of the system and can be utilized by others. So it's a wonderful thing to do your own original longitudinal research, right? Like, keep it your own. Okay, we're coming up to the end. We always ask one question, which I'll ask you in a minute, but I can't end the interview without asking you to tell us a little bit about what it was like competing on Jeopardy. Will you give us a little bit of that, how that happened, and did you enjoy it? Was it terrible? How was the anxiety?
So it was very anxiety provoking, but I would say, much like writing a book is for people, being on Jeopardy was like a lifelong dream
Amazing.
from the time of being a child. But it's one of those things you don't think will ever actually happen. And you have
Yes.
very little power over it happening. All you can do is take the test, put your name in the pool, give a decent audition, because they do have a round where they, have you play a mock game. And I actually made it to that round like 20 years ago. And I think I sort of bombed that part because I didn't
Yeah.
realize, like, oh no, you have to be on TV. Like, you have to be
Yes.
engaging and, kind of upbeat and not like a bitter graduate student. And so I did not get a call back at that point. But then in 2020, actually, I took the test and received the call for the audition. And then when I got the call to actually go on the show, which was amazing, it was still COVID, so it was a little
Yeah.
different experience. There was social distancing, there was no live audience, but it was still kind of amazing and surreal.
That's incredible.
But also extremely anxiety provoking. I made sure to hold my buzzer outside of the view of the camera so no one could see my hands shaking during the games. I got questions that I knew, and I was able to not answer the questions I didn't know, and it just all kind of worked out okay. And then I was very fortunate to be invited back for a tournament, the Champions Wildcard tournament, and it was a lot of people who had first appeared during the COVID period, and they brought us back, and then I got kind of the full Jeopardy experience, which was really fun.
That's so cool. Last question for you, Laura, is what are you reading right now?
Yeah, so I read a lot of nonfiction, but I try not to read in the genres I work on. So I don't read like academic books for the most part. Yeah. I really like sort of like pop archaeology books. Yeah. Because they're just like so far removed from what my graduate training was or anything I know about or anything that's like happening today in current events. That would be upsetting. So I'm currently reading a book I just picked up in a bookstore. It's called The 7 Wonders of the Ancient World. And it is sometimes hard to turn off my developmental editor brain.
Yes.
Like, that chapter's a bit long, and I'm not sure what this 5-page passage was for, but I still try to enjoy and just sort of go with the flow of what I read.
That sounds fun. I love archaeology. Who's the author of that book?
This is Bettany Hughes, who I believe is British.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Laura. This has been really fun.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Publishing Playbook. I'm your host, Sarah Russo. You can subscribe to our show wherever you like to get your podcasts or find us on YouTube at Page One Media. This episode was produced by Julie Canfer with support from Bella Gibb and the team at New Books Network. For more information about Page One Media, please visit our website at www.pageonem.com. Keep on reading, and we'll talk to you soon.